Welcome to the Yamaha XJ 600 10,000 kilometer review. To be honest, this will probably be the most in-depth review of this bike you will find on the internet, because I have done everything on this bike. I went on a 10,000 kilometer trip to Morocco with this bike. I rode this bike off-road and I rode this bike to the sand dunes of the Sahara. I toured it. I went a lot of highway miles on it. I also used this bike as my daily commute for now most part of a year. I went with it on the Nordschleife. I also went on a huge motorcycle ride out with thousands of bikes and the police getting involved as well. So this bike has been through a lot. I really love this bike. It's a really good machine, especially for someone as me, young, not a lot of money, just wants a motorcycle. I am the perfect guy to buy this bike. If you're kind of like me, same age group, same, not financially a bit on the short side, get this one. It's a really good one. Let me explain to you in the following video why. But some things must be said. When I first got this motorcycle, well, actually before I bought it, when I test rode this bike, I took this bike on quite a long test ride because I was really unsure about it. Because this bike lacks character when you ride it, especially when you are not really like used to it yet and have not really fallen in love with it yet, and you get the first time on it, it feels kind of the expression meh would be a motorcycle, and that is sadly quite accurate. This already starts with the first aspect I want to get into, the engine. The engine has 60 horsepower and 54 Newton meters of torque. To be honest, it's not the most exciting. I'm still in my A2 license, so the bikes that I'm used to ride are all A2 restricted, and also this one. So maybe opened up, it's a bit better, but compared to the FZR and to, oh, you can't see it, but it's standing over there, the XL, this feels odd. Like you twist the throttle, expect really good acceleration, and you just have this moment where you just lunge forward in expectation of acceleration, but is that all exciting in that regard? The engine kind of feels boring, yes, but the engine is extremely reliable and it is really well known for that, and you can really rely on this bike. And if you're in the market for a bike between 500 to 2,000 euros, that is the main point you want to look at. And for that, this bike is really amazing. Like in that aspect, 10 out of 10. Really good. Like I rode this bike all the way to Morocco without issue and without thinking, will this bike leave me stranded in the desert to, I don't know, get into some real trouble. Especially if you're short on the money side or are a beginner, you want a bike that runs. And this bike does run. Coming to the next aspect of the bike, that would be the whole handling, the suspension and everything. That is actually quite okay. It is quite good. It is really fun on a twisty road. You can really swing it from side to side. And even though it has more narrower tires, I think it's 130 in the rear, you can have a lot of confidence in the bike to a certain degree. If you're a beginner rider or in the first 1 or 2 years of riding, it will get hard to push this bike through to its limits. That said, the bike handling wise has its limits. If you really start to push the bike in the curves and go from side to side, then the steering will begin to wobble when you have the bike over on the side. Not really wobble, it's more of a pogo stick type situation where it goes up and down, which can then lead to wobble. If you know it, you kind of expect it and it's all good, but it can scare you a little bit. I had some close calls with this bike, and as soon as you really need to trust this bike handling wise, it starts to shake all over the place if you really give it strong inputs, and it's not a bike that you can rely on in difficult situations really. I'll play a clip of it here. That is really a downside, I think. Also, if you're a beginner rider, that can be a bit scary. Compared to the Yamaha FZR that I also own, that bike is really confidence inspiring in shitty situations on the road, and you can really rely on it leaning over, and you can rely on the handling, and it feels like on rails compared to this. So that is what I would say to the handling. Good, but not great. But for being a sport tourer, this suspension actually handles off-road really well. Like, I rode this bike through the Banderas Reales in Spain and through the Sahara, and off-road it really performs well. I mean, it performs well for what it is. It does not have a skid plate. It has, the internet says a bit less. The internet says like 16 or 14 centimeters of ground clearance. I measured it myself and it has about 20. And it handled some single trails like really well, and sometimes when I'm out with some friends that ride enduros, I can keep up with them quite well if they decide to go off-road. And also because this is more on the cheaper side of a bike, you don't really worry about it that much. And the most fun bike you can have is a bike where you kind of mind if you drop it, but at the same time it's a ride if it happens. And this is one of those bikes. You can do kind of everything you want with it, and that is really great. So next, let's look into how it is to actually live with this bike and to commute on this bike. As a background, I used this bike as my bike to go to uni, and I had about, during COVID, where the whole situation was a bit unclear, about a 120 kilometer commute to uni. So that always worked really well. At first, when I first wanted to buy the bike, I didn't like the fairing at all. I think it's still ugly, but it is so practical. It keeps so much wind off your chest. It's really good. Like at first I was like, oh, this bike also comes as a naked bike, so I was like, I will definitely buy the other headlight and change it. But the wind protection is awesome. It's really a good feeling to not have that much wind hitting your chest, so you get used to it and you kind of want to keep it after some time. Apart from that, when it comes to commuting, it does amazing. Like I have, commuting-wise, zero complaint. The gears are quite short, so you have a quite quick going through the gears, which makes it really fun in the city. And it also leaves really quickly off the stoplights if you like go lane splitting in between the cars and want to out-accelerate the cars and other mopeds. It is perfect for that. That is really good. Also, the handling of the bike, due to it having its really upright riding position, handles really well in between cars, in between traffic jams. Also, the height of the handlebars is really good, because the height of the handlebars means that the mirrors of cars kind of go in between your mirror and the handlebars, except with sports cars. The perfect height to bash off mirrors for sports cars. Yeah. But commuting-wise, this bike is really great. Also because you kind of can park it everywhere without worrying that much. Because people will not sit on it. People will not sit on this bike. This is quite cool. With the FZR that I also own, typical like 90s looking sports bike, I had multiple times where I came back to the bike and someone was sitting on it to take a photo. And no biker likes that. So this is cool about this bike. No one wants to sit on it. I think that is really nice. And at the same time, even though I already complained about the looks, it has some features looks-wise that I really enjoy. That is the tank. I think the tank is quite beautiful from its form and how you look at it. Also the exhaust with the chrome. They kind of tend to look cool, and the bike comes with crash protection for the engine, which is great if you're a beginner rider and maybe drop your bike, or if you maybe take the bike off-road or something, or fool around in some way with it. Something that I still want to say about this bike somehow gets a lot of attention. If you're on this bike, people constantly want to talk to you. Especially people above the age of 35, you will not go to a gas station without talking to someone and them telling you how great this bike is. This bike is really like famous for being great and reliable. I went with this bike through France, through Spain, through Morocco, and in whatever language people try to communicate to me, this bike is awesome. So also still here when I drive around locally, at every gas station I had this moment. Kind of for people in my age group, usually people do not care if you ride a motorcycle, like at all. If I am one of those persons that talks too much about it and gets on people's nerves a little bit with it, and people don't really want to hear about it, actually. That is the thing that I have with the FZR. But with this bike, somehow even some people who don't want to listen to you talking about your bike are interested in this. I don't know why. I had the following situation on the uni parking lot. I actually had a girl from uni coming up to me and asking if it's a Ducati or Italian. I was like, yeah, of course it is. It's not the only time that I have heard this. It's multiple times. People that don't really know what it is or don't know stuff about bikes tend to think it maybe could be Italian. or sporty, which is actually quite a kind of cool, because it always leaves me with this baffled face of, oh, okay, great. I think that's mostly because the bike is red. I think the bike comes in other colors as well, like really beautiful dark green and also race yellow. I think the race yellow could have a similar effect, but for some reason people sometimes think this bike is Italian. Some other things in general about this bike that are still quite cool to know for the 10,000 kilometer review. Due to this bike having some off-road capability, quite okay handling, you can really manage to fool around a bit on the dirt with it, like doing donuts and doing all sorts of stuff where you lose a little bit of traction. The bike feels really confidence inspiring due to its low point of gravity, and also to me being quite tall, I can just wrestle it around quite well. Even though it's quite a heavy bike, it's above 200 kilos. Also, the engine cage is really cool, not just for protecting the engine, but if you do really long highway miles, you can put your feet on it, like on a chopper. And that makes, if you have to go 1,000 kilometers in one day, really cool. Like, this takes so much pain out of your knees. It's really good. One thing I still want to get into. Something is a bit difficult with this bike's carbs and battery. I don't know the exact details of it. I just looked through some forums a few months back. Apparently this bike has problems starting really commonly. So if you don't ride this bike like all the time, you will need starter spray for it. Like, I tend to ride this bike either not for a longer time or like every day or second day. If you don't ride it for like 4 days, it won't start, and you need to take off the tank and put starter spray into the airbox. That can be kind of a handful, especially when you're in a hurry and want to get to work in the morning. And you swing your bike leg over the bike and you have to go to work. You have about 10 minutes left till you're late, and then you put on the bike and you're like, oh shit, and you hear it just rattling and not starting, and then you're all of a sudden push starting the bike and it doesn't really work, and then for some miracle it fires up and you already, like, nerve-wise ruined, arrive at work. That can kind of suck sometimes. So if you own this bike, like most people in online forums say, definitely also invest into a spray can for starter spray, because you'll need it. Also, the fuel consumption on this bike is not all that great. It tends to consume about 5 to 5.5 liters of fuel on 100 kilometers, and that is kind of not that great for a motorcycle, I think. Like the FCR, the other bike I have a good comparison to, tends to not consume that much, even though it's way more sporty and also really old. That is something to keep in mind. Mentioning my round on the Nürburgring, I think you could also convert this bike into a track bike and go racetrack riding with it. Maybe you should then have another look at the front suspension, but it performed quite well on the Nürburgring. Except it was super slippery and I almost fell on my ass 2 times. This does also for a quite good overall can-do-everything bike, including going onto a racetrack, which is quite cool. Like, if you buy this bike as your first beginner bike, you can do kind of everything with it, a little bit. Like, yeah, it's really great in that department. And to my statement earlier of saying, this bike is kind of dull and boring, and if the expression meh would be a motorcycle. Yeah, that's true, but it makes up for that with all those great abilities that it has, where it gives you so much freedom as a rider yourself that you can tear up fire roads in between tree lines, that you can go on huge tours with it, you could go on a racetrack with it, you can commute with it really well. People like to look at it for some reason. I think it's a really good bike in all those regards, even though it kind of is dull. The engine itself and how the bike rides itself. If you just look at it in a pure reason for what it was built sense for. As a sport tourer where you're like, it's not that sporty. to be honest. It does not feel sporty. I mean, I have not experienced the full engine of this bike. The difference can't be that big, especially other bikes with the same amount of power feeling so much more potent than this and accelerating way quicker above 120 kph. But in general, I'm really happy with this bike, so I would definitely recommend, if you are looking for a bike between 500 to 2,000 euros that just runs and it doesn't cause you a lot of trouble and that you can do a lot of stuff with and is beginner friendly, I think you should definitely go for it. This is the demographic this bike is for. If you have a lot of money, care about other thrills this bike can deliver, then stay away from it. That's kind of what I have to say. If you just want a really reliable bike that you can really rely on, then you will love this bike really, really much. So definitely subscribe and ring the bell, and maybe leave a comment if you liked it for this channel so I can keep making those videos, and see you guys in the next one.